The October Crisis was a sequence of events revolving around the independence of Quebec. The 1960s was a time of change. Nationalists resorted to terrorism to make Quebec an independent province. Le Front de Libération de Québec, also known as the FLQ, was a national liberation movement that was founded in 1963. After many bombings, the FLQ abducted British diplomat James Cross. The FLQ had several demands, but the government refused to alter them except reading the manifesto over the radio and on TV. Due to the refusal, they abducted Provincial Minister Pierre Laporte. No progress in their negotiation therefore resulted in the Quebec government demanding the help of the army to assist the police force. Pierre Trudeau proclaimed the War Measures Act, which gave police the right to arrest and detain people on suspicion alone, suspending the Canadian Bill of Rights. Pierre Laporte was killed the next day. Many artists, unionists, intellectuals, and individuals who supported Quebec nationalism were arrested without any warrant. The crisis ended on December 3rd in exchange of safe conduct to Cuba for the abductors and release of James Cross.
The FLQ. The FLQ, le Front de Libération du Québec, was a paramilitary terrorist organization from Quebec. Somewhere in the year of 1960, the FLQ sustained the Quebec sovereignty movement. The FLQ was active around 1963 to 1970 and was regarded as a terrorist organization from its vicious methods of action. But some historians referred them as idealists, while the police referred them as amateurs. The FLQ, founded by the Quebecois in 1963, Raymond Villeneuve and Gabriel Houdon, were the founders of the FLQ. Later on, a Belgian named Georges Schuters joined the organization. Pierre Valliez, the author of the book Nègre Blanche d'Amérique, also joined the FLQ in the year 1965. In 1963, the underground FLQ activists put bombs in mailboxes of their desired targets. In the fall of 1970, the FLQ abducted Trade Commissioner James Cross and demanded the release of political prisoners. To publicize their manifesto, a plane to take them to Cuba or Algeria, or to give them $500,000. They also gave the government 24 hours to decide which to choose, but they refused and was seeking a negotiation that they was all settled adequate. 5 days later, they kidnapped the Trade Commissioner Pierre Laporte, and 8 days later, they found Pierre Laporte's dead body in the trunk of a car. On December 3rd, 1970, the FLQ released James Cross to the police in exchange for the tickets to Cuba. Of the James Cross kidnapping, 5 of them escaped to Cuba, then to France and back to Canada. One of them stayed in Montreal but was arrested in 1980 and was sentenced to death a year after.
James Cross was born in Ireland in 1921. He had a diploma in economics and political science and later became a British diplomat in Canada. In 1967, he was sent to Montreal during the October Crisis. He was one of the 2 kidnapped victims at the time. He got abducted by Marc Cabroin on October 5, 1970. Cross was abducted at gunpoint from his British diplomat residence at 1297 Redpath Crescent. He was held for 2 months. He was released on December 3rd in exchange for safe passage for the abductors to Cuba. James Cross was free on December 3rd, 1970.
You're bluffing.
Am I bluffing, mother?
Pierre Laporte was born on 25th February 1921 and died on 17th October 1970. Laporte was a governmental correspondent for the Montreal newspaper Le Devoir, and he was well known in Quebec. He entered politics in 1961, and he was a famous cabinet minister as Deputy Premier and Minister of Labour in the Bourassa Liberal government. He was also a Canadian lawyer and journalist before the 10th of October 1970, when the FLQ had kidnapped Pierre Laporte, and he was taken out on October 17th, just days after he went missing by members of the group during the October crisis. Pierre Laporte's body was found in the trunk of Paul Rose's car. He was abducted from his residence on Robitel Street in St. Lambert, Quebec. The kidnappers were Paul and Jacques Rose, Francis Simard, and Bernard Lautry. They approached Laporte, and he was playing football with his nephew in his front lawn, and forced him into their vehicle at gunpoint.
The War Measures Act first started as a federal statute and enforced by the Parliament in 1914 during the start of World War I. This gave the government strong legal powers to maintain safety and security during a time of war and insurrection. The War Measures Act was active during World War I and World War II, and also proclaimed during the October crisis in 1970 by Pierre Trudeau. This act limits civil rights of a citizen. The suspended rights include the right to be protected against unwarranted or arbitrary arrests, detentions, searches and secures, and the right to have an attorney. Because of the kidnappings of Pierre Laporte and James Cross, the federal government and Liberal leader Pierre Trudeau was interviewed by CBC reporter Tim Ralph. During this famous interview, the reporter asked Trudeau concerning the armed soldiers that were patrolling around Parliament Hill. The response by Trudeau was, "Well, there are a lot of bleeding hearts around people who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed. But it's more important to keep law and order in this society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of." Before Trudeau could continue, the reporter interrupted him, saying, "At any cost, how far would you go with that, and how far would you extend that?" The response was, "Well, just watch me," and this later became a catchphrase of North American politicians. During October 15, the Canadian Armed Forces assistance was requested by the Quebec government to support the police because 3,000 people who supported the FLQ's separatist ideas were at Pulse Wave Arena trying to have their voices heard when they were shouting, "We're going to organize and choose our ground, and we will vanquish." The next day, on the 16th, Trudeau, under the War Measures Act, declared a state of apprehended insurrection. Over 450 people were arrested in Quebec alone, but later on most of them were released and no charges were placed on the police. At the time in Quebec and throughout Canada, a great number of people were supporting the War Measures Act, but ever since the act was introduced, the government would use it during peacetime, and many Canadians debated whether this act gave the police too much power of arrest and detention. Ever since July 21, 1988, the War Measures Act has been replaced by the less extreme and more limited Emergencies Act. It differs from the War Measures Act in two ways. Any declaration of emergency must be reviewed by the Parliament, and temporary laws made under the Act are to be subjected by the Charter of Rights and Freedom.
Thank you for watching.